Seattle, Washington.
Today's date is 5/12/98. The time is 12 o'clock. Case number 97399305.
There is a guy who has been arrested. And he's currently in the King County Jail.
Do you realize I'm taping this conversation? Do I have permission to do so? Yes, you do.
He said it was a nice night. He's having a good time.
Why don't you describe that day? What were you doing? Looking for a prey. What kind of prey? A human.
The detectives are both looking at each other, and they're both thinking the same thing.
You had a specific plan. And once again, what was that plan? Murder, man. Murder.
We might be dealing with a serial killer here.
2016, after 36 years with the Seattle Police Department, I spent the last 22 years of those as a homicide detective, where I worked on about 250 murders. I was at my son's wrestling tournament and just getting started, and my phone rang. It was the sergeant. He said, "We got a woman there with a throat cut." And I went, "Well, she probably didn't cut her own throat. I'm on my way in." When I heard where the body was found, I knew the area. It's industrial. There are actually city shops right across the street where we had our police cars worked on. So I was very familiar with the area.
It's a dangerous and infamous area in downtown Seattle, known as the Jungle.
The first time I heard about the Jungle, I was intrigued. It's called the Jungle really because it's this stretch of woods that's a large, lawless, homeless encampment.
It is a gathering area for the lost souls of Seattle, people who are ignored by society, who live a life different than anything you can imagine, who live in an area of crime, drug addiction, and violence in the middle of a major city.
So I pulled up on the scene and it was bitterly cold. I've worked more than 2 or 3 murders that originated in Jungle.
Steiger is about as qualified as you can be in the murder business. He has a passion for it. He's smart, instinctive, and extremely well experienced. If you want somebody to investigate a murder, he'd be your guy.
What do we got?
They report that there is a female, physically small. She's sitting on the staircase, and her throat has been slashed. She has bled out, and she's been dead for some time. They also say there's a witness who saw her sitting there and was the person who called the police to draw their attention to this woman.
He was in the back of a patrol car. The guy looked like a transient. They said he's got blood on his clothing. Of course, that piqued my interest right away. All of the crime scene was contained by this staircase. I didn't go down the stairwell, and we don't do that. You stand up there and you make your observations, and nobody touches the body until the medical examiner gets there. That's their jurisdiction. I saw that this woman was kind of curled up at the bottom of the stairs. I could see blood on the mattress, blood around her. It was a mess down there.
He notices one exterior pair of pants, but there are other pants under that pair of pants. So she has the appearance of someone who probably lives in the jungle because she's dressed that way.
It just kind of paints this picture of this young woman who was living on the streets in a really hard time, who was just doing her best to survive.
Her shoelaces.
I saw her shoes were off, and one of her shoelaces was untied. The taking the shoe off was obviously deliberate. Why would someone take the shoe off in that cold weather? She certainly didn't do it herself.
Steiger makes a mental note of that, but he knows it's unusual. And anything unusual is worth paying attention to. Later that day, Steiger has the arrival of a forensic pathologist at the scene from the Seattle coroner's office, and they together examine the remains.
She's a Native American woman who looks to be quite young. They think she might actually be a teenager.
I could see devastating throat slashing. And it got all over major vessels in her neck, and then one that went through her cheek, and it was almost all the way through.
So you have someone playing with the shoelaces, and then it goes into this violent rage involving a knife. The knife isn't found at the crime scene.
My impression was something to do with prostitution or drugs, maybe a domestic violence thing, but you gotta go with the flow. You gotta go where the evidence takes you.
This person, which is not uncommon for a likely resident of the jungle, carries no identification whatsoever.
So when that happens, you have to wait until she's fingerprinted and to find out who she is.
Okay.
The medical examiner told me I'll do the autopsy on Monday morning. I said, I'll see you there. And then he took her away.
So the witness who found this girl, his name is William Gilmer. Steiger looks at this witness, and he has blood on his clothes. Now that's pretty interesting. He has more than enough reason to believe that this man could be involved in this.
But sometimes I'll talk to him right there, but because this guy had blood on him, I wanted to be a little more elaborate.
You going down the homicide for me?
Yes.
And I said, we're going to take you down to my office. I'll get you a cup of coffee or something, and we'll talk about it. The best interrogations are the ones where the suspect doesn't know he's being interrogated.
I'm gonna record our conversation, is that okay?
It's just a conversation, right?
All right, tell me what happened. I was just looking for a place to sleep.
He is a resident of the jungle.
He had been by there earlier. He was looking for someplace to sleep, and he's probably slept down that stairwell before.
So he's there. Hi! Actually trying to get him wake up and make him move.
He could see someone down there, and he goes, hey, hey.
He notices that she hasn't moved. He gets closer to her and realizes she's covered in blood and that she's dead. And he is taken aback. He goes into that building, which is a Department of Corrections halfway house, and of course they call 911, and here comes the Seattle Police Department.
Okay, tell me this. How'd you get the blood on your shirt?
I asked him about the blood.
Gilmer says he got in a fist fight with a guy,
Straight a couple punches.
got punched in the mouth, they beat each other up, and that blood is not only his from his mouth, but also some from the other guy.
I said, so there's no chance in the world that that is her blood. And he looked at me and said, there is no chance in the world that that is her blood. Said it very comfortably, very matter-of-factly, and said, I'm gonna have to swab your hands, I'm gonna have to take your clothing because you have blood on it. Okay, I'll give you something else to wear.
So they do take his clothing for testing, and it is determined that that's not the blood of the victim.
He was perfectly cooperative, had no problem with anything, answered all my questions honestly, and had no hesitation. So
Free to go.
eventually we eliminated him as a suspect.
Steiger is experienced and he's smart. And he's thinking about this girl. How did she come to be murdered in the stairwell next to the jungle?
And I remembered back, I think it was in September that year, that there'd been a murder of a woman, and unsolved at that point. That also happened in the jungle.
So he decides that it's in his interest to review that case and see if there's any comparisons between that event and this event. So he goes and looks at that report.
And I looked over the photographs of the crime scene.
And he's looking through them until he comes to a certain photograph. And he almost drops his head on the desk.
Denise Harris's case, she was tied up with her own shoelaces.
That hits Steiger like a lightning bolt.
The fact that my victim's shoe was even off, that means that somebody took that shoe off for a reason. And you wouldn't just take your shoes off in that cold weather like that. Something was going on.
In Homicide, you learn very quickly there's no such thing as a coincidence. Detective Steiger is dealing with the homicide of an unknown female close to the jungle in Seattle, Washington.
Hey.
Mike Szynski was the lead detective in the Denise Harris murder, which is an unsolved at that point.
Take a look at this.
My impression was this is related. So I showed him pictures of my case.
We went into homicide around the same time. Him just a little bit before me, maybe 6 months before me.
Besides the fact that the shoelaces run down, the other thing that led me to think these could possibly be related was the geographic proximity. They were very close together, probably like 800 or 900 yards away.
Szynski tells him his victim, Denise Harris, is 42 years old, and she was a school teacher.
Denise's mother lived in California. I was able to contact her. Denise seemed to be battling some substance abuse problems.
Denise had a home. She had a home here in Seattle. She had a fiance. She also had a career. Her fiance describes this woman that has these career aspirations, but she's a victim to addiction. The addiction completely controlled her life.
Denise wound up losing her employment and ultimately lost her life in the jungle.
Denise's body was found lying on her back, and I could tell from her clothes that she was dragged a short distance. She was wearing a small zip-up jacket and white tennis shoes that did not have the laces in them.
Her murder was horrific. Her hands and her feet are bound together by her own shoelaces, and she has a belt tied around her neck. She also has her own bra stuffed in her mouth as a gag. Whoever did this really put time into it and did it in a really sadistic way.
The first thing you're thinking is, what's a girl like this doing up in the jungle? And she was really close to a campsite. Another thing that was very interesting was there was a beer can. It was about head high. And I was looking at it, and they go, well, why do you want that? I go, nah. They go, we got pictures of all these on. I said, no, I just want to take that picture. It kind of stands out to me.
What do you think?
At that point of our investigation, I did not have any suspects. But I was doing a lot of running around. We were shaking a lot of trees. Comes with the territory.
Here we have a situation, and this is what you think about as a detective. What facts connect one to the other? Is there a series of dots here? Can we put a line between those dots?
At that point, I wasn't convinced they were related, but I wanted to keep that possibility open.
All right, Mike. I'll be in touch.
Detective Steiger, first and foremost, needs to know who his victim is to really be able to begin the investigation. He needs a clearer picture of exactly what happened to her. So he heads to the medical examiner's office.
Finding out who she is was very important.
What do we got?
I was confident by mid-morning I'd know who she was, and I did.
So we were able to identify the body from
The coroner informs Steiger that he has identified her by her fingerprints because there is a police record.
We identified her as Olivia Smith.
She is almost 28 years old. She would be 28 in another month had she survived.
When I looked at her record, it was everything I would have expected. Drugs, prostitution, other things, assault.
She has led a tragic life. She dabbles in narcotics, recreational use, which becomes an addiction, which results in her spiraling into the state of prostitution, of petty theft to support the drug habit, and allows her to wind up in the jungle.
How'd she die?
severed the carotid artery.
Cause of death, exsanguination, meaning the victim bled to death. That occurs in less than 2 minutes. He then looks at other stab wounds. This person's been stabbed in the chest and 7 times in the buttocks. Now, why would somebody do that? That's unusual.
When I see the wounds that she suffered in this, and it was a very quick and very violent attack,
You have to consider, is someone torturing this victim? Is this like a cat playing with a mouse? No, he's doing what he does. But why would somebody play with a shoelace when we're talking about killing someone? He's going to sexually assault them, probably. First pair of pants is unbuttoned, the rest aren't yet. And then this knife appears by her, probably, and she draws it to try to fend him off. And it enrages him. He stabs, he cuts, he slashes, and he runs.
The medical examiner pointed out a tattoo on her arm that said Taylor.
People get art on their bodies for a reason. It's not random.
Okay.
Taylor is someone of importance to this girl. Who is Taylor? Steiger finds Olivia Smith's family. They don't know where she is. They haven't heard from her in some time. They knew she'd fallen on hard times. They wanted to prevent that and couldn't.
She really was a wonderful person. Nothing ever worked out for her.
They were not necessarily surprised because of her lifestyle, but they were devastated nonetheless.
Homicide investigation ultimately is a process of elimination. Who could have done this? Who might have a reason to do it? And ultimately, who actually did it?
Olivia was in a relationship with a man who had been abusive to her and had threatened to kill her.
Steiger asks, what is his name? And the mother says, his name is Taylor Shaw. Steiger, of course, thinks back to the autopsy. The significance of that tattoo has just been revealed. Taylor was at one point her lover, and she carried his name on her body in a tattoo.
I'm truly sorry for your loss. I'll let myself out.
The family didn't know much about him, so I actually had to look for other reports where he had been accused of domestic violence against her.
Olivia Smith, in the recent past, had filed a protection order against Taylor Shaw to keep him away from her.
Not only had he threatened to kill Olivia, but he had actually threatened to stab her.
I found that very intriguing.
Yeah, can you bring in Taylor Shaw? I'm gonna bring him in for questioning.
It doesn't matter why, but he threatened her life and said he would use a knife. That makes him a prime suspect. Detective Steiger is investigating the brutal homicide of Olivia Smith, stabbed to death and left to die in a stairwell, when he learns from her mother that her boyfriend, Taylor Shaw, had threatened her with a knife in the recent past. Steiger also notices there's an active warrant for his arrest.
I'm gonna bring him in for questioning.
So it's a perfect way to gather him up and find out what he has to say for himself in regard to the death of Olivia Smith.
A couple days later, I heard that someone had been arrested. And I went to the jail and talked to this guy.
Mr. Shaw, I'm here to talk to you about an active homicide investigation.
This is the first big break in the case.
The murder of Olivia Smith?
No. Hold up. Look, listen. I lied. I'm not Taylor Shaw.
They go to question him, and he's saying, you have the wrong guy.
I didn't murder anyone. I swear my name is Tim Williams.
He claimed his identity was Taylor Shaw because he was wanted under his own identity for robbery.
Man, I got priors.
He just was stupid enough to use the name of somebody we were looking for. He was trying to get out of something, and instead it got him in jail.
Officer!
There's a lot of rabbit holes you go down that sound like they might be involved, and then you get to the end, you realize, oh, that had nothing to do with it, and you have to go back and start over again.
So Taylor Shaw is still out there in the cosmos somewhere, and nobody seems to know where. So what do? You continue to investigate. Steiger is wondering what his next step will be when he hears that there's been discovery of human remains in very close proximity to the jungle.
When I arrived at the scene, I was met by the patrol sergeant and a couple patrol officers. And they told me that a transient had been walking behind these buildings and he was looking for cans and bottles and he came across a skillet. And so he took me back behind this warehouse and he had his flashlight and he was shining it and he pointed, it's right there, and he pointed it at a spot on the ground, and I looked and I could not see anything. And he said, there's the shirt and there's the skull. When the skull came into view, I could see the gag in her mouth, and her mouth was wide open, almost in a silent scream. If you have a problem with bones, you call a forensic anthropologist. They can find sometimes wounds on bodies that a pathologist might miss based on what's on a bone.
The anthropologist tells Steiger these bones have been here for months and reports that this is the body of a female. The remains, I have some mummified skin available, some hair on the skull. There are some fragments of clothing, a plaid shirt, several layers of clothing, once again indicating a homeless person.
Can we roll the body?
We're actually able to turn the body. You can see the feet and arms were tied behind her back.
And Steiger almost collapses when he sees that the wrists and arms are tied with shoelaces.
Right then the bells went off. And I said, Denise Harris was tied up with the shoelaces. Olivia Smith's shoes were partially unlaced. This girl was tied up with her shoelaces. That's the first time I used the word serial killer in this case.
There is no longer any question in his mind that the Seattle Police Department is faced with a serial killer.
Next to the body, there was a tote bag. And inside the tote bag, there were some papers. It had the name Antoinette Jones. And so that was the first clue who this might have been. So once we have a name of a potential victim, then we run the name Antoinette Jones in our systems.
She is a very similar person in terms of her past to the other two victims. Someone who's fallen on hard times as a result of circumstances in her own life.
To her family, she was called Tony. She had a great singing voice, and she had these big dreams of having a career in music. She ended up getting pregnant quite young and dropping out of school, but things did start to look like they were gonna work out for her. She moved to Colorado, she's taking care of herself and her daughter, but that's when two really horrible things happened to her.
Her brother served in the first Iraq War, suffered PTSD from that involvement, and took his own life. Her mother said that Antoinette could not recover from the death of her brother. Antoinette had been a recreational drug user before that, but then spiraled into a depression and never recovered from it, causing her to wind up in the jungle in Seattle, Washington.
They hadn't seen her in months, but no one had reported her missing, so we couldn't firm it down, but we were pretty sure it was in mid-August that she was killed.
Hey, I just got a call about a third victim having shoelaces tied around her wrist.
I went up to the homicide office where Mike Szynski was working the Denise Harris case.
They had a call out, decomposed body, and guess what? She was tied up with shoelaces.
Let's get this down on the board.
We have 3 homicides in a relatively short period of time. 2 of the cases are very similar. Gag in the mouth, ligature on one case, probably the same in the skeletonized remains. No way to tell that, except the hyoid bone is crushed in the skeletal remains, and that indicates strangulation, but you can't say ligature, but nonetheless, same MO. The difference in the third case is the MO gets interrupted by some method or means, and stabbing as the method of death. But the shoelaces are played with.
Geographically, there's less than a mile between each three scenes in a triangle pattern.
You could be at one scene and look at both of the other scenes from it. That's where the skeletal remains of Antoinette Jones was found. And there's further down this side, and there's where Livy was.
I said, I think we got a serial killer working here.
How many people could he be responsible for killing? That's absolutely unknown. Is he just starting out, or has he been doing this for years? Who is this guy? And how do we find him?
Mike.
The first break in this case came a few weeks later. Mike Szynski got a call from a guy who was in jail for robbery. He said he had some information about the Denise Harris case.
The guy says, hey, I hear you're the one working on that case with the girl up there in the jungle. I said, yeah, I am. He goes, I got some information for you. I know who killed her. I want to get out of jail, and I'll help you find the guy.
Well, it's not quite that easy. Tell me what you got, and I'll see what I can do.
He goes, I'll tell you something that no one else would know. You never found her purse, did you? That stopped me right there. I'm thinking, how would he know that?
This guy says, I was with the guy who did this to Denise Harris. Now, that's pretty startling.
I'll be down there in a little bit, all right?
He goes, all right, do that. Bring me one of those cappuccinos, too. Cappuccino. I said, you got it.
Dwayne Lee Harris is known to the Seattle Police Department for a long and varied criminal history. He goes by his moniker or his street name, which is Chilly Willy, taken from a cartoon character of a little penguin who was cold all the time.
What can you tell me?
So I go and I talk to this guy in jail.
I saw everything.
He lays it all out. He said, I was up there with him and
He's strangled.
He killed this girl.
Tied up with shoelaces.
Took her purse and threw it down this storage drain.
He said he was up there with a guy named Mike Smith, and that Mike Smith did this.
So you're gonna be able to tell us where it's at?
Of course. But you gotta promise to get me out of here for helping.
I ain't making any promises.
He's kind of heeing and hawing about, cooperating.
Fine.
So we go and grab this guy out of jail and secure a waist chain on him, and handcuff him to his sides, and we put a pair of leg irons on his ankles.
My impression was he's a streetwise guy. He's a player, right? I thought this guy is more involved in this case than he's admitting.
Steiger and Szynski ask him, can you show us where Denise Harris was killed? And to their shock and amazement, he does.
She was right here, man. Right there.
He takes them there, to the exact spot where Denise Harris was discovered.
Where's the purse?
It's back there in the woods.
We keep pressing him now about whatever happened to Denise's purse.
Nothing here.
Man, look, I don't know. It was up here, I promise, man. I hit my head on a can coming up here.
And he describes how he stood up and he hit his forehead on that beer can that was impaled on the tree branch.
Chilly says Mike Smith was here with him, and Mike Smith is the one killing, and Mr. Harris is just watching.
I ain't buying this whole Mike Smith story, man.
I don't know, man, look.
You don't know, or you just lying about everything?
I started pressing him on it a little bit, and I said, yeah, Mike Smith, what a name that is. Come on, really? That's all you got?
Man, look. Man, he real, I'm telling you.
So Harris goes into some length describing this Mike Smith, this Steiger and Szynski. He said he's a black male, he's in his 30s, he has a mustache, all kinds of specifics about who he is.
Get him out of here.
You know, this whole Mike Smith thing, yeah, I was really suspicious of that.
He was here.
Your mind is just going, is this guy playing me? I know he was here by himself? This other guy, this Mike Smith, I gotta find that guy.
The question was, is he just a witness or is he the killer?
Mike Smith sounds like a made-up name. And they go and find every Mike Smith that's ever been arrested in the state of Washington and get a picture of him and show all these photographs to Mr. Harris. He identifies no one as being Mike Smith. Harris then becomes confrontive. Well, I'm not giving you any more information. Fine.
We're done here.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, Mr. Harris. Steiger and Szynski remain extremely interested in Mr. Harris. As they're maneuvering around the city, working this case, they get a request from another detective.
Hey, Jeff.
Could you stop and pick up this girl?
One of the other detectives is investigating a completely unrelated case and asked us, I got this little 16-year-old girl. She's a witness in my murder, and I need to talk to her. Would you guys mind driving out there and grabbing her and bringing her back?
Gotcha.
And so, sure, we'll do it.
She was a young street prostitute.
Angel, you got to get out of this life.
I said, your grandparents love you very much.
I mean, you're going to wind up getting hurt one of these days.
You got to stop this. I mean, you could get hurt out there.
Yeah, you probably had some real problems, you know, with being assaulted by Johns and stuff.
Has anything scary ever happened to you? She goes, yeah, as a matter of fact.
So I'm completely naked, and then he tries to tie me up with my own shoestrings.
When she said that, I literally almost drove off the bridge I was on. I went, he said, what? You did what?
One of these guys that picked me up, he tries to tie me up with my own shoelaces.
I was naked. I think he was going to kill me, but I got away and ran naked down the street.
When did this happen?
And what are the odds that the two of us pick her up and she starts talking about this serial killer that we are investigating?
What was his name?
Chilly Willy.
Well, my. Chilly Willy. We happen to know that guy.
Today's date is 5/12/98. The time is 12 o'clock. I'm Detective Mike Szynski along with Detective Floyd Steiger. I'm speaking to Dwayne Lee Harris.
Detective Steiger and Szynski have been investigating the deaths of Antoinette Jones, Denise Harris, and Olivia Smith as being murdered by the same individual.
Do you realize I'm taping this conversation? Do I have your permission to do so? Yes, you do.
We go back to our office. I put Dwayne Lee Harris, a.k.a. Chilly Willy, in a room. He's just sitting there, smoking a cigarette, having his cappuccino. And he looks up to me and rolls his eyes at me. And he goes, Mikey Mike? TJ, Denise Harris, I killed them. And that in the stairwell, too. I killed them girls.
Dwayne Lee Harris is their serial killer.
Are you sure you don't want to order? I'm sure.
Steiger and Szynski know, based on the condition of the remains of Antoinette Jones, she was probably the first victim in the jungle.
We're going to talk a little bit today about a girl named Antoinette Jones. Is that the person you know, TJ? No, unless she took some dope from me.
TJ, as he knew her, I ripped him off one time. Some drugs.
Why don't you describe that day? I was downtown. We started walking. Where we go? To my playground. Your playground? Did you hear this all scoped out in advance? Yeah. Why did you take her to this spot? Nobody can hear you scream. It's my area, man.
And Chilly said, it's one of my spots. What do you like about this spot? No one could hear you scream.
I asked her, I said, do you use your said, no, I don't know you. I said, you shooting on me. You took my drug. That time, I hit her in the face.
I just hit her. Bam.
She hits the ground.
Knocked her on her man. Got her up, punched her again. And I started strangling her.
I choked her out with the devil. Did she say that when you started to choke her up? She told me she had some kids, so I didn't want to hit her.
And he says, Antoinette Jones talked to me while I was attacking her, and she said, don't hurt me, don't kill me, I have children. And I looked at her and I said, it's not time to talk about your kids, it's time for you to die.
How long did it take to kill her? It took a minute because she tried to hold her last breath. She tried to hold her last breath, and the eyes pops up, and you can feel the eyes when they pop out.
Because I can tell when they're dying, when you got them good, and their eyes are bulging out, and she pisses herself. Then she was down there, and I threw some cardboard over her.
Why don't you take us back? We're talking about Denise Harris now. How'd you hook up with Denise? Never met the lady a day in my life. What did you think she was when you saw her in the street? About 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. What did you think you were? So you figured she was a crack. Right.
Chili said, I met her downtown in a bar. She came walking up and he goes, why don't you give me one of them cigarettes? She goes, what you got for me? In his hand, he had a bag of rock cocaine.
That's a weakness he can exploit, because the answer is going to be, yeah, that'd be good.
And what were you going to do? At this time, we're going to kill her anyway. Okay, that's what you had planned. Right.
Well, come with me, because I've got a safe place. I have a place I call my playground. He doesn't include the fact that his playground involves sexual assault and murder. He saves that part, where he then attacks and kills her. In exactly the same way he killed his first victim.
I tied her feet up and her hand up. What did you use to tie her up? A shoestring.
He strangles her with a belt, ties her up with shoelaces. He had sex with her. He thought this was great. And then he moves on into the jungle, waiting for his next prey to present themselves.
Earlier in the car today, I asked you when you feel your best. What did you say? Killing. When you're killing. Right.
Dwayne Lee Harris is a psychopath. There's no question about that.
When you pick somebody up, they don't know that it's going to be their last smoke. Mm-hmm. So then you got to walk with them. But you know that, don't you? I know everything.
At one point in my interview, I said, Dwayne, what would happen if I let you walk out of here today? And he looked at me and said, you'd have 4 more body bags.
Now, Szynski and Steiger are curious about why the death of Olivia Smith was somewhat different, that a weapon was involved. Tell us about Olivia Smith.
What were you doing? Looking for a prey. What kind of prey? A human.
In this particular instance, he knows Olivia Smith.
You had a specific plan. And once again, what was that plan? Murder, man. Murder, 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 murder.
When he described Olivia's murder, he described luring her down there with crack cocaine.
We all get high a little bit.
They decide to go someplace private, and he takes her to that stairwell, and then he starts to attack her, and she doesn't want any part of that.
And he said, I was going to tie her up. I was getting her shoelaces off, and she pulled a knife, and she stabbed me. And he said he went into a rage.
He takes the knife away from her and just goes crazy with it.
I was able to get the knife away from her, and I cut her throat. Yeah, and then I stabbed her a bunch of times.
In his mind, he hurts people. People don't hurt him.
Is that the jungle up there? That's the jungle. And you're the predator. Nah, I'm the king. You're the king of the jungle. Yeah.
Really? Well, I think we're going to take your crown off your head and lock you up under a prison, Dwayne.
If I let you walk out this door right now, you'd be out there killing, right? Damn Skippy. That's my hobby. You're what? I'm a killer.
Dwayne Harris was charged with 3 counts of murder in the first degree and 1 count of attempted murder in the first degree.
And he was sentenced to 94 years in the state penitentiary, where he remains to this day.
When Chili was found guilty, I felt more relief when he was sentenced. This was very hard on everybody involved in the case, even as detectives. I said, this was hard, dealing with somebody like him and him casually talking about murdering so many people and strangling them to death, and being with him every single day, and then going home to our families. And I said, it takes a toll on a person.
I think what stands out for me in this case is just how cold-blooded and lacking in empathy this man was and is. He's a psychopath. The man is a psychopath. And his joy is in harming and hurting and killing innocent people who did nothing to him. And thankfully, that's a rare thing.
Dwayne's in prison for the rest of his life. Does that make it all better? It doesn't. There's no such thing in murder as closure. Everybody says, at least the family has closure. No, they don't. If you're the family of a murdered victim, you never have closure. You live with it till the day you die.
I think that he absolutely chose these women feeling that they were disposable, and he quite literally treated them like they were trash. What's incredible about the investigation is seeing how hard the detectives worked on these cases, and specifically how hard they worked to understand the victims, to really get to know who they were prior to their deaths.
Detective Steiger and Detective Szynski, this case mattered to them, and this case mattered to us, and these women were not forgotten. They mattered. They were human beings whose lives were taken.
So Harris's plan did not work. They certainly were not as disposable as he looked at them to be.
Olivia Smith, Denise Harris, Antoinette Jones. Their mothers loved them. Some of them were mothers themselves. They have children that love them.
Los Angeles has a way of hiding its secrets in plain sight. By day, the city dazzles beneath an endless stretch of California sunlight. Palm trees sway above crowded sidewalks. Tourists chase dreams that have survived for generations. Neon signs promise excitement around every corner. But when the sun disappears behind the skyline, another Los Angeles slowly emerges. The streets become quieter in some places, more dangerous in others. Shadows gather in forgotten alleys. Buildings that once represented hope begin to tell stories no one wants to remember. Among those buildings, one address has carried more whispers than almost any other. A hotel that has witnessed decades of tragedy, violence, disappearances, addiction, desperation, and death. Long before the world learned the name Eliza Lamb, the Cecil Hotel had already earned a reputation that blurred the line between history and urban legend. For years, people walked through its lobby without knowing they were stepping into one of the most infamous buildings in America. Travelers arrived with heavy suitcases and hopeful smiles. Some stayed for a single night. Others never truly left. The walls absorbed countless conversations, arguments, promises, and final goodbyes. Every hallway seemed to remember footsteps that history had forgotten. Every elevator carried strangers who would never know whose shadows had stood in the exact same place decades earlier. Then, in the winter of 2013, another young traveler checked in. She was 21 years old. She carried books in her backpack, a camera to document her adventure, and the excitement of someone finally exploring the world on her own. Her journey was supposed to be filled with photographs, postcards, and stories she would one day laugh about with friends and family. Instead, her name would become one of the most discussed mysteries on the internet, dissected by millions of strangers who had never met her but believed they understood what had happened. Her name was Eliza Lamb. If you have ever searched for unexplained mysteries online, chances are you have seen the video. A young woman stands inside an elevator. She presses several buttons. She waits. The elevator doors refuse to close. She steps outside, cautiously peeking into the hallway. She quickly returns. Then she leaves again. Her movements become increasingly unusual. Her hands move through the air in ways that seem impossible to interpret. She appears to react to someone or something that the camera never captures. The elevator remains open throughout the encounter, silently recording every second. For millions of viewers, those 4 minutes became something unforgettable. People slowed the footage down frame by frame. They brightened the image. They searched every corner of the hallway. Some claimed someone was following her. Others believed she was hiding. Many insisted they were watching the final moments before a murder. The internet did what it often does when faced with uncertainty. It filled every unanswered question with speculation. Forums exploded with theories. Videos reached millions of views. Some pointed toward serial killers. Others blamed hotel employees. Some insisted secret government experiments were involved. Others wandered into supernatural explanations, convinced the Cecil Hotel itself was somehow responsible. Every new theory attracted another audience. Every audience invented another explanation. Before long, the real person at the center of the story slowly disappeared behind layers of speculation. The mystery became entertainment. The woman became a symbol. But real lives are never as simple as internet theories. Behind every viral mystery is someone who had parents waiting for a phone call. Someone whose bedroom still held childhood photographs. Someone whose family was searching every possible lead while complete strangers argued online about ghosts and conspiracies. Long before the internet transformed Eliza Lamb into an unsolved puzzle, she was simply a daughter. A student. A traveler. A young woman trying to discover herself one city at a time. And somewhere inside one of America's most notorious hotels, her journey came to an end. Nearly 3 weeks passed after she disappeared. 3 weeks filled with uncertainty. 3 weeks during which hotel guests unknowingly drank, showered, and brushed their teeth with water that would eventually become part of one of the most disturbing discoveries in modern true crime history. Complaints began quietly. The water pressure felt strange. The taste was unusual. Some described the water as darker than normal. Others noticed an unpleasant odor they couldn't explain. At first, these complaints seemed like little more than maintenance issues. Hotels experience plumbing problems all the time. Employees followed routine procedures. No one imagined what they were about to find. A maintenance worker climbed toward the rooftop. Above the city, beyond the guest rooms and crowded hallways, enormous water tanks stood against the California sky. They were ordinary industrial structures that few visitors ever thought about. Heavy metal containers quietly storing thousands of gallons of water for the entire building. One of those tanks held a secret. When its lid was opened, everything changed. Inside floated the body of 21-year-old Eliza Lamb. The discovery shocked investigators. It horrified hotel guests. It stunned the public. Yet strangely, the discovery answered almost nothing. How had she reached the roof? Why had no one seen her? How did she enter the water tank? Could she have climbed inside alone? If not, who helped her? If she entered willingly, why? The questions multiplied faster than the answers. Police searched for evidence of assault. They searched for evidence of homicide. They searched for fingerprints, DNA, witnesses. Anything that could explain how an intelligent young traveler vanished inside a crowded downtown hotel before being found in one of the least imaginable places. What they found and what they did not find would become just as controversial as the surveillance video itself. Because sometimes, the absence of evidence becomes evidence in the minds of the public. And once that happens, separating fact from fiction becomes almost impossible. Years passed. Experts examined the investigation. Psychiatrists studied Eliza's medical history. Engineers discussed the hotel's rooftop access. Internet detectives revisited every frame of the elevator footage. Documentaries were produced. Books were written. Podcasts devoted entire seasons to the case. Each generation of viewers discovered the mystery all over again, often beginning with exactly the same question. What really happened inside the Cecil Hotel? The official investigation would eventually arrive at an answer. It was an answer supported by forensic findings, toxicology reports, medical history, and the absence of evidence pointing toward homicide. Yet for many people, certainty remained just out of reach. Because the human mind is uncomfortable with ordinary explanations when confronted by extraordinary images. A silent elevator. An empty hallway. A rooftop water tank. A young traveler whose final recorded moments seemed almost impossible to understand. This is not merely the story of a mysterious death. It is also the story of how grief can become spectacle. How incomplete information can evolve into worldwide conspiracy. How millions of people can watch the same 4-minute video and see entirely different realities. Most importantly, it is the story of a real young woman whose life was far richer than the mystery that came to define her in the public imagination. Over the next chapters, we will return to the beginning, before the headlines, before the viral footage, before the rooftop discovery. We will follow Eliza Lamb's journey as faithfully as the evidence allows, examining both the confirmed facts and the questions that continue to surround this case without confusing speculation for truth. Because sometimes the greatest mystery is not what happened inside a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Sometimes the greatest mystery is how an entire world can become captivated by a tragedy, while slowly forgetting the person at its center. The deeper investigators looked into Eliza Lamb's disappearance, the more the case seemed to split into two completely different stories. One story belonged to the official record. It was built from surveillance footage, witness statements, forensic examinations, medical records, and timelines measured down to the minute. It was a story assembled piece by piece, carefully and methodically, by detectives whose job was not to satisfy public curiosity but to determine what could actually be proven. The other story belonged to the internet. There, certainty came quickly. Every shadow became a suspect. Every missing detail became evidence of a cover-up. Every unanswered question demanded an extraordinary explanation. The distance between those two stories only grew wider with time. And somewhere in the middle stood Eliza herself, a young woman who could no longer speak for her own final days. Perhaps that is what makes this case so enduring. Not because every question remains unanswered. Not because every mystery has resisted explanation. But because the evidence leaves room for imagination, and imagination, when fueled by fear, rarely stays within the boundaries of fact. It is easy to watch a few seconds of grainy surveillance footage and forget that cameras never record thoughts. They never capture fear. They never reveal memories. They never explain why a person makes one decision instead of another. They simply watch. Cold. Silent. Unblinking. The elevator camera documented movement. Nothing more. Everything beyond those movements would become a battlefield of interpretation. Some viewers saw panic. Others saw confusion. Some believed they were witnessing someone hiding from an unseen attacker. Mental health professionals, looking through a different lens, suggested that the behavior could also be consistent with someone experiencing a severe psychiatric episode. Neither perspective could change what the camera failed to show. There was no audio. No conversation. No complete picture. Only fragments. And fragments have a dangerous habit of inviting stories that feel true, even when they cannot be proven. That is why this case deserves patience. Not because patience creates better mysteries. Because patience protects the truth from being buried beneath assumptions. Throughout this story, there will be moments that seem almost impossible to explain on first impression. Doors that appear to behave strangely. A rooftop that feels inaccessible. A hotel whose past seems almost too dark to be real. Each of those moments has inspired countless theories over the years. Some are grounded in evidence. Others exist only because uncertainty leaves an empty space people desperately want to fill. Our journey will not ignore those theories. They became part of the cultural phenomenon surrounding Eliza Lamb. Ignoring them would mean ignoring an important chapter of how this case transformed from a missing person investigation into one of the internet's defining mysteries. But every theory must ultimately face the same question. What evidence supports it? Because evidence, not popularity, is what separates investigation from imagination. As we move backward through time, away from the headlines and toward the beginning, another picture slowly comes into focus. A young woman excited about traveling alone. Parents waiting thousands of miles away in Canada, trusting that their daughter would soon call with another update from California. Friends expecting photographs instead of silence. A hotel employee checking guests in without realizing that one routine reservation would one day be remembered around the world. No one could have imagined how ordinary those moments seemed. That is the unsettling nature of real tragedy. It rarely announces itself. There is no dramatic music. No warning. No sign that an ordinary afternoon will eventually become the opening chapter of an international mystery. Life simply continues. Until it doesn't. And by the time people realize something has gone terribly wrong, the most important moments have already slipped into the past. The surveillance cameras have stopped recording. The witnesses have forgotten small details. Memories have begun to fade. What remains are pieces. Some sharp. Some blurred. Some forever missing. Those pieces are all investigators ever truly have. Everything else must be earned. In the coming chapters, we will step inside downtown Los Angeles as it existed in January of 2013. We will walk through the streets surrounding the Cecil Hotel. We will meet Eliza Lamb before the world knew her name. We will examine the final days of her journey, the search that followed, the rooftop discovery that shocked an entire city, and the investigation that attempted to answer questions millions of people were asking all at once. Some answers may surprise you. Others may leave you with even more questions. But every step of this story will remain rooted in what can be responsibly reconstructed from the available evidence. Because the greatest respect we can offer Eliza Lamb is not another sensational theory. It is the willingness to separate what is known from what is merely believed. Only then can we begin to understand how a young woman's solo adventure became one of the most discussed true crime stories of the 21st century. And it all began with a single hotel check-in that seemed, at the time, completely ordinary. That ordinary check-in would become the first page of a story that refuses to fade. More than a decade has passed since Eliza Lamb vanished inside the Cecil Hotel, yet her face continues to appear in documentaries, podcasts, books, online discussions, and late-night conversations between people fascinated by mysteries that seem to resist easy answers. Few cases have traveled so far beyond the investigation itself. Few have become so deeply woven into internet culture. But popularity does not always bring clarity. In many ways, it does the opposite. The more a story is shared, the more it changes. Small details are exaggerated. Rumors begin to sound like facts. Speculation quietly replaces evidence. Before long, people remember the legend instead of the investigation. This story asks us to do something different. It asks us to slow down. To resist the temptation of easy conclusions. To look not only at what happened, but also at how the world responded when confronted with uncertainty. Because this case is about more than a mysterious death. It is about the power of unanswered questions. It is about how millions of strangers became emotionally invested in someone they had never met. It is about the strange relationship between tragedy and curiosity in the digital age. And above all, it is about a young woman whose identity became overshadowed by a single viral video. Before we examine the hotel, the investigation, or the theories that emerged, we must first meet the person at the center of it all. Not the figure frozen inside an elevator surveillance recording. Not the internet mystery. Not the headline. The real Eliza. The daughter who exchanged messages with her parents while traveling. The student who loved reading and writing. The traveler who dreamed of seeing the American West with her own eyes. The young woman who struggled with challenges that were largely invisible to the strangers around her. Every true crime story begins with an ending. But the most meaningful ones eventually return to the beginning. Because understanding a life is often far more important than understanding a death. In the next chapter, we leave behind the shadows of the Cecil Hotel and travel back to where Eliza's story truly begins, long before the headlines, before the disappearance, and before the mystery that would capture the world's attention. Only by understanding who she was can we begin to understand why her story still resonates with so many people today. Before the headlines reduced her life to a mystery, before grainy surveillance footage turned her into one of the internet's most recognizable faces, Eliza Lamb was simply a young woman standing at the edge of adulthood. Carrying the same mixture of confidence and uncertainty that defines so many people in their early 20s. Her story did not begin inside the Cecil Hotel. It began thousands of miles away, in a quiet neighborhood of Vancouver, Canada, where her life unfolded in ways that were ordinary, hopeful, and deeply human. Vancouver is a city of contrasts. Snow-covered mountains rise in the distance while the Pacific Ocean stretches toward the horizon. Rain falls often enough to become part of everyday life, leaving the streets glistening beneath soft gray skies. It is a city where cultures blend naturally, where families from every corner of the world build new lives while holding tightly to old traditions. Among those families was the Lamb family. Eliza was born on April 30, 1991, to parents who had immigrated from Hong Kong in search of better opportunities. Like many immigrant families, they worked tirelessly to create stability for their children. They operated a modest restaurant, spending long hours serving customers, balancing finances, and making sacrifices that often went unnoticed by the people around them. The restaurant was more than a business. It represented years of determination, sleepless mornings, and the belief that hard work could create a brighter future for the next generation. Growing up, Eliza understood those sacrifices even if they were rarely spoken aloud. Family expectations were never expressed through dramatic speeches. They existed quietly, woven into daily routines. Education mattered. Responsibility mattered. Respect mattered. Success was not simply a personal achievement, it was something shared by the entire family. Yet Eliza was never someone who fit neatly inside expectations. She possessed an imagination that constantly wandered beyond the familiar streets of Vancouver. While others found comfort in routine, she seemed drawn toward stories waiting beyond the horizon. Books became windows into places she had never seen. Writing became a way to organize emotions that often felt too large to explain in conversation. Even as a teenager, she displayed a thoughtful, introspective personality. Friends described someone intelligent and curious, someone capable of laughing easily one moment and disappearing into deep reflection the next. She was fascinated by literature, fashion, music, and travel. Her interests were broad, shaped by a genuine curiosity about the world rather than a desire to impress others. Like many young adults growing up during the rise of social media, she documented pieces of her life online. Her Tumblr blog became something of a digital journal, filled with photographs, quotations, observations, and personal reflections. It was not carefully curated to create a flawless image. Instead, it revealed someone trying to understand herself while navigating the complicated transition between adolescence and adulthood. Reading through those posts today feels remarkably intimate. Some entries celebrate small victories. Others reveal disappointment. Some speak about dreams of traveling independently, escaping familiar surroundings, and discovering who she might become in places where no one knew her name. There is an honesty to her writing that many people recognized in themselves. She questioned her future. She worried about expectations. She searched for meaning. She wanted to grow. These were not extraordinary feelings. They were profoundly ordinary. And perhaps that is one reason her story continues to resonate. Beneath the mystery lies a young woman whose hopes and insecurities feel deeply familiar. But beneath those visible layers of creativity and optimism was another reality that only those closest to her fully understood. Eliza lived with bipolar disorder. Mental illness rarely announces itself in dramatic ways. More often, it arrives quietly, altering thoughts, emotions, and perceptions over time. Good days can appear completely normal. Difficult days may remain invisible to everyone except the person experiencing them. Bipolar disorder is not simply a matter of changing moods. It is a complex medical condition capable of affecting energy, judgment, sleep, confidence, and the ability to distinguish rational decisions from impulsive ones during severe episodes. Managing the illness required ongoing treatment, medication, medical appointments, careful monitoring, consistency. According to later investigative findings, Eliza had been prescribed several medications intended to stabilize her condition. Like many people living with chronic mental illness, maintaining that balance was not always easy. Side effects could be frustrating. Daily routines could become exhausting. Moments of improvement sometimes created the dangerous illusion that medication was no longer necessary. The journey was rarely straightforward. Yet reducing Eliza's life to her diagnosis would be just as misleading as reducing her life to the mystery that followed. She was far more than a medical history. She attended university. She formed friendships. She laughed. She dreamed about future adventures. She planned trips. She wrote about books she wanted to read and places she hoped to visit. Her illness was part of her life, but it was never the entirety of her identity. By the beginning of 2013, Eliza felt ready for something she had wanted for a long time. She wanted to travel alone. Solo travel represents different things to different people. For some, it is an escape. For others, it is a test of independence. For Eliza, it appears to have been both. She wanted to experience new cities on her own terms, making decisions without relying on friends or family. There is a particular excitement that comes with boarding a plane alone for the first time. Every unfamiliar street feels like an invitation. Every train station, every cafe, every bookstore offers the possibility of becoming part of a personal story that belongs to no one else. Her parents were understandably cautious. Any parent might hesitate before watching a 21-year-old daughter leave for another country by herself. Yet Eliza reassured them in the ways many young travelers do. She promised to stay in contact. She planned her route carefully. She intended to check in regularly, letting her family know she was safe. The trip itself reflected her adventurous spirit. She planned to visit several locations along the west coast of the United States, moving from city to city while documenting her experiences. It was meant to be a celebration of independence, a chance to explore landscapes she had only seen in photographs and films. Friends later remembered how excited she had been. There was no sense that this journey would become anything other than another chapter in her life. A memorable one. A happy one. No one around her imagined they were witnessing the final weeks of her life. That is one of the quiet cruelties of hindsight. Looking backward, every ordinary decision begins to appear significant. Every conversation feels like it should have carried hidden meaning. Every goodbye seems unusually important. But at the time, nothing felt extraordinary. A young woman packed her suitcase. She organized her itinerary. She charged her camera. She prepared for an adventure. Just like countless travelers do every single day. When Eliza finally left Vancouver, she carried more than clothes and travel essentials inside her suitcase. She carried expectations that could not be folded neatly between shirts or tucked into the pockets of a backpack. She carried the quiet hope that this journey would become proof to herself as much as to anyone else that she was capable of navigating the world on her own. Solo travel has a unique rhythm. There is no companion to fill every silence. No familiar face waiting across the breakfast table each morning. Every decision belongs entirely to the traveler. Which street to explore, which museum to visit. Whether to spend an extra hour inside a bookstore or sit on a park bench simply watching strangers pass by. For some people, that freedom feels overwhelming. For others, it feels intoxicating. Eliza seemed to embrace it. She documented moments throughout her trip with the enthusiasm of someone eager to preserve every new experience. Buildings, streets, cafes, bookstores, bits of architecture, ordinary scenes that many tourists might walk past without noticing, these were the kinds of details that caught her attention. She was not chasing luxury. She appeared more interested in discovering the personality of each city, finding beauty in places that felt authentic rather than glamorous. There was also a comforting routine to her travels. She stayed in contact with her parents. Although separated by thousands of miles, the distance felt manageable because communication remained consistent. Phone calls and messages became a bridge connecting Vancouver to California. For her parents, each update offered reassurance. They knew where she was. They knew she was safe. They trusted that if anything unexpected happened, she would let them know. That routine would eventually become one of the most important details in the investigation. Because routines are noticeable only when they suddenly stop. As Eliza continued south through California, her itinerary eventually brought her to downtown Los Angeles. For millions of people around the world, Los Angeles exists as an idea before it exists as a city. It is sunshine, movie studios, beaches, palm trees, celebrities, and endless opportunity. Yet downtown Los Angeles tells a different story from the polished images found in travel brochures. It is a place of striking contrasts. Modern skyscrapers stand only blocks away from aging buildings whose best years passed decades ago. Business professionals hurry toward office towers while, on nearby sidewalks, homelessness and poverty remain impossible to ignore. Expensive restaurants coexist with discount stores. Historic theaters stand beside abandoned storefronts covered in fading graffiti. Every city has layers. Downtown Los Angeles wears all of them at once. The neighborhood surrounding the Cecil Hotel, particularly the area known as Skid Row, has long struggled with homelessness, addiction, mental illness, and violent crime. Thousands of vulnerable people pass through its streets every day. Social workers, police officers, business owners, tourists, and residents all experience the same neighborhood from completely different perspectives. To someone unfamiliar with Los Angeles, those contrasts can feel startling. Walk one direction for a few blocks, and the city appears vibrant and full of life. Walk another, and the atmosphere changes almost immediately. The sidewalks become quieter. Storefronts appear neglected. People move with greater caution. Hope and hardship exist side by side. It was within this complicated landscape that the Cecil Hotel continued its long and troubled existence. By 2013, the hotel was already infamous among locals, though not necessarily among international travelers. Built in the 1920s during a period of optimism and economic growth, it had originally welcomed business travelers and tourists seeking affordable accommodations in the heart of Los Angeles. Elegant architecture, marble details, and an impressive lobby reflected the ambitions of another era. But cities change. Neighborhoods evolve. Economic fortunes rise and fall. Over the decades, the Cecil gradually transformed from a respectable hotel into something far more complicated. Long-term residents occupied some rooms. Backpackers rented others. People struggling with addiction found temporary shelter there. Travelers on tight budgets often chose it because of its inexpensive rates and central location. The building became a place where completely different lives intersected without ever truly meeting. Its history accumulated tragedy after tragedy. Suicides. Violent incidents. Unexplained deaths. The building developed a reputation that eventually overshadowed its architecture. Stories spread from one generation to another, each adding another layer to the hotel's already unsettling image. Yet reputations do not appear on booking websites with equal clarity. To someone planning a budget-conscious trip from another country, the Cecil could simply look like an affordable hotel in downtown Los Angeles. There is no evidence that Eliza fully understood the building's infamous history before arriving. Like many travelers, she likely viewed it as one stop along a larger journey. She checked in. Collected her room key. Entered the lobby. Walked through hallways where thousands of strangers had walked before her. Nothing about those first moments suggested that history was about to repeat itself in a way no one could have imagined. At first, Eliza shared a room with other travelers in a hostel-style arrangement. According to later reports, some roommates noticed behavior they considered unusual enough to make them uncomfortable. Hotel management subsequently moved Eliza into a private room. Those reports have often been repeated over the years, but they should be viewed with appropriate caution. Public accounts vary in detail, and they do not establish precisely what Eliza was experiencing or why her behavior appeared unusual to others. What they do suggest is that, at some point during her stay, hotel staff decided that a room change would be more appropriate. That decision would later become another piece of a puzzle that investigators attempted to reconstruct. Looking backward, every small event seems loaded with meaning. At the time, it was simply another hotel adjustment. Nothing more. Nothing less. Outside the hotel, life continued uninterrupted. Cars flowed through downtown intersections. Street vendors greeted pedestrians. Office workers hurried toward evening trains. Tourists photographed landmarks only a short distance away. Inside the Cecil, guests checked in and checked out without ever learning each other's names. No one knew that one guest would soon vanish. No one knew that surveillance cameras would capture images discussed around the world. No one knew that a routine missing person report would eventually become one of the most recognizable cases in modern true crime. The city remained indifferent. As cities always do. Millions of lives moved forward simultaneously, each carrying private worries invisible to everyone else. Somewhere among those countless lives was Eliza Lamb, still believing she was simply another traveler exploring another destination on an ordinary winter day. She could not know that her remaining time in Los Angeles would be measured not in weeks, but in days. And before anyone realized she was missing, the first subtle signs that something was beginning to unravel had already started to appear. Those first signs were so ordinary that they attracted almost no attention. That is often how real-life tragedies begin. There is rarely a dramatic turning point that announces itself in the moment. Instead, there are small changes, details that seem insignificant until they are viewed through the lens of hindsight. A delayed phone call. A missed appointment. A behavior that feels slightly out of character. On their own, each detail appears harmless. Together, they become the opening pieces of a much larger puzzle. Throughout her trip, Eliza had maintained a simple promise to her family. She would stay in touch. For her parents, those regular check-ins became part of the rhythm of each day. They did not need lengthy conversations. A brief call, a short message, reassurance that she had reached her next destination safely, that was enough. It allowed them to share in her adventure from thousands of miles away while easing the natural concern that comes with watching a daughter travel alone. For several days, everything unfolded as expected. The messages came. The routine held. Nothing suggested that anything was wrong. Then, without warning, the routine stopped. There was no phone call. No message. No explanation. At first, it may have seemed like nothing more than a delay. Travelers lose track of time. Phones run out of battery. Sightseeing turns into late evenings, and schedules change without notice. Parents often tell themselves not to worry too quickly. Hours passed. Then more hours. The silence continued. With every unanswered attempt to reach Eliza, concern slowly replaced reassurance. Eventually, the silence became impossible to ignore. Her family reported her missing. What they could not have known was that, at almost the same time they were searching for answers from Canada, detectives in Los Angeles were beginning a race against time that would lead them through hotel hallways, surveillance recordings, rooftop access points, and countless interviews. No one yet understood how unusual this case would become. No one imagined that one surveillance video would be viewed hundreds of millions of times over the following years. No one imagined that a single hotel elevator would become one of the most analyzed pieces of security footage in modern history. Those developments still lay in the future. For now, there was only a missing young traveler, a worried family, and a city far larger than anyone could search alone. As we move into the next chapter, the atmosphere begins to change. The excitement of a solo adventure gives way to uncertainty. Ordinary hotel corridors become places investigators will revisit again and again. Routine security cameras become silent witnesses. Every hour that passes without answers raises the stakes. Because somewhere inside the Cecil Hotel, events were unfolding that would soon transform an ordinary missing person investigation into a case that continues to fascinate and divide the world more than a decade later. The mystery is about to begin. When people think of Eliza Lamb today, they often picture a single frozen image. A young woman inside an elevator. Her hands suspended in midair. Her eyes searching a hallway the camera could not fully see. That image has become so deeply embedded in popular culture that it threatens to erase everything that came before it. It is replayed in documentaries, dissected in online forums, slowed down frame by strangers searching for clues. But a person cannot be understood through 4 minutes of surveillance footage. A life cannot be measured by its final moments. To understand what was lost inside the Cecil Hotel, we have to step away from the elevator entirely. We have to return to the person behind the mystery. Imagine Eliza on an ordinary afternoon in Vancouver, long before California entered the picture. Rain taps gently against the windows, a familiar soundtrack in a city where grey skies are almost comforting. Inside her room, books are stacked in uneven piles beside notebooks filled with thoughts that were never intended for a worldwide audience. Pages are marked with folded corners. Pens lie scattered across a desk that looks lived in rather than carefully organized. A cup of tea has long since gone cold while she loses herself in another novel. She reads not because someone expects her to. She reads because stories allow her to step into lives completely different from her own. Characters become companions. Places become destinations. Words become a way of making sense of emotions that are often difficult to explain. That love of literature shaped the way Eliza viewed the world. She noticed details that others overlooked. The texture of an old brick wall. The quiet atmosphere inside a bookstore. The way afternoon sunlight changed the color of city streets after rain. These small observations found their way into her writing, giving even ordinary experiences a sense of quiet significance. Like many young adults of her generation, Eliza kept an online journal. Today, social media often encourages polished versions of reality, carefully selected photographs, perfect vacations, edited moments designed to appear effortless. Eliza's online presence felt different. Her writing revealed uncertainty as often as confidence. She shared excitement, disappointment, ambition, frustration, and self-doubt without pretending that life always followed a straight path. Reading her posts years later feels less like scrolling through social media and more like opening someone's private notebook. She reflected on books that moved her. She wrote about wanting to become stronger. She questioned whether she was growing into the person she hoped to become. Some days her optimism seemed almost contagious. Other days, her words hinted at exhaustion and emotional struggle. There was no performance. Only honesty. That honesty has become one of the most important windows into who Eliza really was. It reminds us that she was not defined by mystery. She was defined by curiosity. She wanted to experience life deeply, not simply to pass through it. Travel represented another expression of that curiosity. For many people, vacations are opportunities to escape routine. For Eliza, travel appeared to be something more personal. It was a chance to challenge herself. To step beyond familiar surroundings. To prove that she could navigate unfamiliar cities independently. Every new destination became both an external journey and an internal one. Walking alone through streets she had never seen before required confidence. Ordering food in unfamiliar neighborhoods required adaptability. Finding museums, bookstores, cafes, and public transportation without relying on anyone else offered small victories that slowly built independence. Those moments may have seemed insignificant to others. To Eliza, they mattered. Because each successful day reinforced the belief that the world was larger than fear. Larger than uncertainty. Larger than the invisible struggles she sometimes carried within herself. Yet those struggles were real. Bipolar disorder is often misunderstood by people who have never experienced it personally or through someone they love. Popular culture frequently reduces it to simple mood swings, dramatic outbursts, or unpredictable behavior. The reality is far more complicated. People living with bipolar disorder can spend long periods functioning much like anyone else. They attend school, build careers, maintain friendships, travel, laugh, Plan for the future. The illness exists alongside ordinary life rather than replacing it. But during severe episodes, the condition can profoundly affect perception, judgment, sleep, energy, and emotional regulation. The changes are not matters of personality. They are symptoms of a medical condition affecting the brain itself. According to investigative records released after Eliza's death, she had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had previously experienced significant episodes that required medical attention. Managing her condition involved prescribed medications intended to stabilize mood and reduce the likelihood of extreme highs or devastating lows. Like many chronic illnesses, successful treatment depended heavily upon consistency. Medication schedules mattered. Medical follow-up mattered. Routine mattered. Disruptions could increase risk. Travel, exciting as it was, naturally disrupted routine. Time zones changed. Daily schedules shifted. Sleep patterns became less predictable. Meals occurred at unusual hours. Even positive experiences could become physically exhausting after days of constant movement. For most travelers, those disruptions are little more than temporary inconveniences. For someone managing bipolar disorder, they can become far more significant. That does not mean travel itself was reckless. Countless individuals living with bipolar disorder travel safely every year while carefully managing their treatment. What it does mean is that maintaining stability often requires additional attention, especially during periods of excitement and major life changes. Investigators would later discover evidence suggesting that Eliza may not have been taking all of her prescribed medication consistently during the final period of her life. That finding would eventually become one of the most important elements considered by medical experts evaluating the circumstances surrounding her death. It would also become one of the most misunderstood aspects of the case. Some people mistakenly interpreted her diagnosis as an attempt to dismiss unanswered questions. Others ignored it altogether because it did not fit more sensational theories. Neither response reflects the complexity of mental illness. Acknowledging bipolar disorder is not about reducing Eliza to a diagnosis. It is about recognizing one important part of her life that may have influenced events during her final days. To ignore it would leave the story incomplete. To focus on it exclusively would be equally unfair. She was never just a patient. She was a daughter whose parents worried when she traveled. A friend whose absence left empty spaces in conversations. A student trying to build a future. A reader who filled shelves with books. A writer searching for the right words. A traveler eager to discover what existed beyond familiar borders. Like so many people in their early 20s, she stood at a crossroads between who she had been and who she hoped to become. The future still felt wide open. There were more places to visit. More stories to write. More mistakes to make. More lessons to learn. There is something especially heartbreaking about lives interrupted during that stage. Not because they are somehow more valuable than others, but because possibility itself remains unfinished. Every plan still points forward. Every dream still feels attainable. Every goodbye assumes another hello is waiting just ahead. No one around Eliza believed they were approaching the final chapter of her life. Least of all Eliza herself. There is a tendency, especially in famous true crime cases, to search a victim's past for hidden warnings. People revisit old photographs, journal entries, conversations, and social media posts hoping to find a sentence that predicts the future, a clue that somehow explains everything that came afterward. Real life is rarely that accommodating. Most lives are filled with contradictions. A person can feel hopeful and anxious on the same day. They can laugh with friends while privately carrying burdens no one else fully understands. They can make plans for next month while struggling through the present. Eliza's life reflected those same contradictions. Her writing often revealed someone who held herself to impossibly high standards. She wanted to improve constantly, to become more confident, more capable, more independent. She celebrated small victories but was equally willing to criticize herself when she felt she had fallen short. Like many thoughtful young adults, she often measured herself against an ideal version she had not yet reached. There is something deeply recognizable about that. The early 20s can feel like standing in a hallway filled with unopened doors. Every decision seems permanent. Every mistake feels larger than it really is. Careers are uncertain. Relationships change. Friendships evolve. Identity itself remains under construction. For Eliza, writing became a place where those uncertainties could exist without immediate answers. She did not write because she had everything figured out. She wrote because she was still trying to understand herself. That willingness to examine her own thoughts has sometimes been misunderstood after her death. Passages written during difficult periods have been pulled from their original context and presented as if they were direct explanations for everything that followed. Human beings do not work that way. A journal captures moments, not entire lives. A difficult week does not define a person forever. Neither does a hopeful one. To know someone requires seeing both. Those who knew Eliza personally remembered more than the struggles recorded online. They remembered her sense of humor. They remembered conversations that drifted effortlessly from literature to travel, from music to philosophy. They remembered someone who could become completely absorbed in a book, then enthusiastically recommend it to anyone willing to listen. She had a curiosity that extended beyond places. She was curious about people, about ideas, about experiences different from her own. That curiosity made solo travel feel almost inevitable. It was not simply about seeing famous landmarks. It was about stepping into unfamiliar environments and discovering how they changed her perspective. There is a particular confidence that grows when someone learns to navigate the world alone. Finding the correct train platform in an unfamiliar city. Ordering food despite a language barrier. Getting lost and eventually finding the way back. Each small challenge quietly reinforces the belief that uncertainty can be overcome. For Eliza, this journey along the West Coast represented another opportunity to build that confidence. She visited San Diego before making her way toward Los Angeles. She explored. She took photographs. She communicated with her family. From everything investigators were later able to reconstruct, the trip initially unfolded much as she had hoped. There was no obvious indication that she believed she was in danger. No confirmed evidence that she feared someone was following her. No verified indication that she expected anything other than continuing her adventure. That distinction is important. Over the years, countless theories have suggested hidden threats that existed throughout her journey. Yet the available evidence does not support the idea that Eliza was being stalked across California or targeted by an unidentified attacker before arriving at the Cecil Hotel. Separating evidence from speculation matters because the truth is often complicated enough without adding details that cannot be verified. As the days passed, Eliza continued moving according to the itinerary she had carefully planned before leaving Canada. She was still the same young woman who had boarded a plane with excitement in her eyes. Still the daughter promising to call home. Still the traveler searching for bookstores, photographs, and memorable experiences. Still someone imagining the stories she would tell once she returned home. Her parents, meanwhile, continued living their own routines in Vancouver. Running the family restaurant. Preparing meals. Serving customers. Waiting for the next update from their daughter. Distance has a strange way of creating simultaneous realities. In Los Angeles, Eliza was exploring unfamiliar streets beneath warm California skies. In Vancouver, life continued beneath the familiar rhythm of rain and routine. Neither world yet understood how suddenly they were about to collide. Every parent who watches an adult child travel learns to live with a quiet balance of pride and concern. There is pride in seeing them become independent. Concern because independence also means letting them face the world beyond immediate protection. That balance is built on trust. Trust that they will make sensible decisions. Trust that they will ask for help if they need it. Trust that tomorrow's phone call will arrive much like today's did. For a while, that trust remained unbroken. The calls came. The messages arrived. Everything appeared normal. And perhaps that is one of the most haunting aspects of Eliza's story. There was no dramatic farewell. No final conversation filled with ominous words. No unmistakable warning that everyone somehow overlooked. There was simply life continuing exactly as everyone expected. Until, without anyone realizing it, the ordinary rhythm of that journey began to change. The next chapter would no longer be defined by anticipation. It would be defined by uncertainty. The excitement of exploration would slowly give way to confusion. The routine of daily check-ins would be replaced by silence. And somewhere within the aging walls of the Cecil Hotel, the final days of Eliza Lamb's life were quietly unfolding unnoticed by the strangers passing her in the lobby, invisible to the city moving around her, and impossible for her family to imagine from thousands of miles away. For investigators, one of the greatest challenges in reconstructing Eliza Lamb's final days was the same challenge faced by anyone trying to understand a person after they are gone. A life is made of thousands of moments, but an investigation often begins with only a handful. A few records. A few conversations. A few images captured by cameras. A few memories from people who crossed paths with someone briefly. The danger is that those fragments can create an illusion that we know the whole person. But we never do. A photograph does not reveal what someone was thinking 5 minutes before it was taken. A message does not reveal every emotion behind the words. A medical record does not describe every dream, every friendship, every ordinary day that made up a person's existence. Eliza Lamb was not a mystery waiting to be solved. She was a person whose story became surrounded by mystery after her death. That difference matters. Before she became connected to one of the most discussed cases of the digital age, she was a young woman attempting something many people her age dream about, discovering who she was away from the expectations and familiarity of home. Travel has always carried a symbolic meaning. People leave places they know in search of something they cannot fully define. Sometimes they are looking for adventure. Sometimes independence. Sometimes inspiration. Sometimes simply a moment of quiet where they can hear their own thoughts more clearly. For Eliza, California represented possibility. The landscapes were different from Vancouver. The weather was different. The pace of life was different. Everything around her carried the feeling of somewhere new. A new city offers a strange kind of freedom because strangers do not know your past. They do not know your childhood. They do not know your mistakes. They do not know the moments when you felt uncertain or afraid. In a new place, you are allowed to introduce yourself again. For someone who loved writing and reflection, that possibility must have held a certain attraction. Every street could become a story. Every person could become a character. Every experience could become a memory. That was the mindset of a traveler, not someone running away from life, but someone trying to experience more of it. Yet traveling alone also removes many of the familiar supports people rely on without realizing it. At home, friends and family often notice subtle changes. They know someone's normal patterns. They know when a person is unusually quiet. They know when something feels different. A traveler in a new city does not have that same safety net. A stranger might see only a brief interaction. A hotel employee might see only a guest asking a question. A person sitting nearby on public transportation might see only someone passing by. The deeper context remains invisible. This is especially relevant when considering Eliza's mental health history. Bipolar disorder can create challenges that are not always obvious from the outside. A person may appear completely capable and composed while managing an internal struggle that requires significant effort. Many people living with mental health conditions develop routines that help them maintain stability. They understand their warning signs. They learn what their bodies and minds need. They build support systems. But travel changes routines. Sleep patterns shift. Daily schedules become unpredictable. Stress levels can increase. Even positive experiences can place demands on the mind and body. A vacation may be exciting, but it is also a disruption. For someone managing bipolar disorder, those disruptions can sometimes become important factors. According to the official investigation into Eliza's death, her medical history became a significant part of understanding what may have happened. Investigators found that she had previously been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and had been prescribed medications related to that condition. The medical examiner's conclusion did not suggest that her diagnosis alone explained her death. Instead, it became one piece of a larger picture. A piece considered alongside the physical evidence, the circumstances of her disappearance, and the absence of signs indicating a criminal act. That distinction is important because mental illness is often discussed incorrectly after tragedies. Some people use it as a simple explanation for everything. Others refuse to acknowledge it because they fear it changes how they remember the person. Neither approach captures reality. A diagnosis does not erase someone's personality. It does not remove their achievements. It does not explain every decision. It is one part of a much larger human story. Eliza was still a daughter who made her parents proud. Still a student building a future. Still a young woman with interests, friendships, ambitions, and fears. Still someone who had only recently begun exploring the possibilities of adulthood. In many ways, the tragedy of her story is connected to how much life remained ahead of her. 21 is an age defined by unfinished chapters. Most people at 21 are still discovering themselves. They are changing their minds. Trying new things. Making mistakes. Learning what matters. The person they will become at 30 or 40 is still hidden somewhere in the distance. That uncertainty is not a weakness. It is part of being young. Eliza was still in that process. Her journey through California was not the story of someone who knew where every road would lead. It was the story of someone exploring. Someone learning. Someone searching. And that is why the events that followed became so difficult for people to accept. The image of a young traveler disappearing inside a hotel seemed to contradict everything people associate with exploration and freedom. Travel is supposed to create memories, not unanswered questions. Hotels are supposed to be temporary homes, not the location of someone's final moments. A vacation is supposed to end with photographs, souvenirs, and stories shared around a dinner table. Not with investigators searching for answers while a family waits thousands of miles away. But tragedy does not choose moments based on what feels appropriate. It does not wait until a person has finished their dreams. It does not arrive only after someone has lived a long and complete life. Sometimes it interrupts the story while the pages are still being written. And when that happens, the world often becomes obsessed with the final page. But before we reach that page, we must remember all the chapters that came before it. Eliza Lamb was not created by the Cecil Hotel. She was not created by a surveillance camera. She was not created by the theories that appeared after her death. She existed long before any of those things. A young woman from Vancouver. A traveler carrying hopes and uncertainties. A daughter whose family expected to hear her voice again. A person whose life contained far more than the mystery surrounding her final days. And in January 2013, as she stepped through the doors of the Cecil Hotel, she entered a place with a history far darker than most guests could imagine. Neither she nor anyone around her knew that this ordinary arrival would become the beginning of a story the world would continue telling for years. The Cecil Hotel had always been a place where people came and went without truly knowing one another. A businessman carrying a briefcase could pass a traveler carrying a backpack in the lobby and never exchange a word. A long-term resident could share an elevator with a tourist heading toward the rooftop and never know their names. Thousands of lives moved through the building every year, briefly intersecting before disappearing in different directions. For most guests, the Cecil was simply a temporary stop. A room key. A bed for the night. A place to leave luggage while exploring Los Angeles. For Eliza Lamb, it was supposed to be exactly that. Another chapter in a journey. Another location on a map. Another memory waiting to be created. But sometime during her stay in January 2013, something changed. The details surrounding Eliza's final days remain among the most debated aspects of the case because there are moments we can confirm and moments where investigators could only reconstruct possibilities. There are no witnesses who can fully explain what she experienced. There is no recording of every movement she made. There is no single piece of evidence that provides a complete narrative from beginning to end. What exists instead is a timeline, a collection of moments. And at the center of that timeline is the last confirmed footage of Eliza Lam alive. The elevator video. The footage that would transform a missing person case into an international mystery. The recording came from a surveillance camera inside one of the Cecil Hotel's elevators. Like countless security cameras around the world, it existed for a practical reason: to monitor activity and provide information if something went wrong. Nobody watching that camera on the night of January 31st, 2013 could have known that the footage would eventually be viewed by millions of people. Nobody knew that every movement inside that small elevator would later be analyzed, slowed down, replayed, and debated. At first glance, the scene appears ordinary. An elevator. A young woman. A quiet hallway. Nothing about the setting suggests that the next few minutes would become one of the most recognizable pieces of surveillance footage in modern true crime. The doors open. Eliza enters. She stands alone. The elevator interior is small and enclosed, surrounded by metal walls and fluorescent lighting. It is the kind of space most people barely notice, a place designed only for transition. A few seconds between floors. A temporary pause before reaching another destination. But in that moment, the elevator becomes the entire world captured by the camera. Eliza presses buttons on the control panel. The doors remain open. She waits. The elevator does not move. From the outside, it appears strange. Why does she press so many buttons? Why does she seem to hesitate? Why does she repeatedly look toward the hallway? These questions would become the foundation of countless theories. But video alone cannot reveal what was happening inside Eliza's mind. A camera can show actions. It cannot show thoughts. It cannot tell us what someone believes they are seeing. It cannot explain fear, confusion, uncertainty, or perception. That is why the footage became both fascinating and frustrating. People wanted it to provide answers. Instead, it provided more questions. Eliza steps toward the elevator entrance. She looks outside. The hallway appears empty. She steps back inside. The doors remain open. The elevator still does not move. She looks outward again. Her body language changes. Her movements become more difficult for viewers to interpret. Her hands move. She gestures. She appears to react to something beyond the camera's view. For someone watching the footage without context, the scene feels unsettling because it violates a basic expectation humans have when watching video: we expect to understand what we see. But this footage creates the opposite effect. The more people watched it, the more uncertain they became. Some viewers believed Eliza was communicating with another person standing outside the camera's frame. Others believed she was attempting to hide from someone. Some interpreted her movements as fear. Others saw confusion. Many years later, mental health professionals and researchers discussing the case suggested that the behavior visible in the video could be consistent with someone experiencing symptoms related to a mental health episode, particularly given Eliza's known history of bipolar disorder. But even that interpretation must be approached carefully. The footage does not provide a diagnosis. It does not reveal exactly what Eliza was experiencing. It simply shows behavior that investigators later considered alongside all other available evidence. The truth is that no one watching that video from the outside could truly know what Eliza felt in those moments. Not investigators. Not internet researchers. Not millions of strangers around the world. Only Eliza knew. And she could no longer explain. That is what makes the footage so haunting. Not because it proves something mysterious happened, but because it captures a private moment that was never meant to become public. A person alone. A person perhaps struggling. A person moving through a moment that only made sense from inside her own experience. The elevator eventually closes. The footage ends. And with it ends the last confirmed visual record of Eliza Lam before her disappearance. For investigators, this was not a mystery at first. It was evidence. A possible timeline marker. a clue that might reveal where she had gone. Police began reviewing the circumstances surrounding her disappearance. They interviewed hotel employees. They examined the building. They searched areas where she might have gone. But the Cecil Hotel was not an ordinary location. It was a massive, aging building with hundreds of rooms and countless places where someone could disappear from view. Hallways stretched through multiple floors. Service areas existed beyond guest spaces. Access points, stairways, and rooftop areas created additional possibilities. Every building has its own geography. To a guest, a hotel may appear simple. A lobby. An elevator. A room. But to investigators, a hotel is a complex network of spaces, each one requiring examination. The search for Eliza began inside that network. And as investigators tried to understand how a young woman could vanish from a crowded hotel, one question continued to grow heavier. Where had she gone after leaving the elevator? At that moment, no one knew the answer. Not the police. Not her family. Not the hotel guests walking through the same hallways every day. Somewhere inside the Cecil, hidden above the rooms and beyond the ordinary paths guests traveled, was the location that would eventually bring the search to a shocking conclusion. But before investigators reached that discovery, they would first have to confront the most difficult part of any missing person case. The possibility that the person they were searching for was no longer waiting to be found after the elevator footage was recorded. The world outside the Cecil Hotel continued moving as if nothing had happened. That is one of the most unsettling aspects of any disappearance. Life does not stop when one person vanishes. The city keeps breathing. Cars continue through intersections. Restaurants continue serving customers. People wake up, go to work, buy coffee, answer phone calls, and walk past strangers whose private struggles remain completely invisible. Inside the Cecil Hotel, guests continued their routines. Someone checked out in the morning. Someone else checked in. Housekeepers entered rooms. Employees answered questions at the front desk. The elevators carried people between floors. The building remained alive with ordinary activity. And somewhere within that same building, Eliza Lamb was missing. For investigators, the first hours after a disappearance are critical. Every moment matters. Memories fade quickly. Digital records change. People move through spaces without realizing they may have witnessed something important. The challenge in Eliza's case was that she had been traveling alone. There was no friend beside her who could describe her final conversation. No travel companion who knew her plans minute by minute. No one inside the hotel who could say with certainty where she went after leaving the elevator. Her family was thousands of miles away in Canada. The people who knew Eliza best were not there to recognize subtle changes in her behavior or explain what she might have been experiencing. They could only provide what they knew from a distance. She had been traveling. She had been communicating with them. She had not returned home. Something was wrong. That was enough. The search began. But as investigators entered the case, they faced an unusual combination of circumstances. The hotel itself was complicated. The timeline was unclear. And the only widely discussed visual evidence was a short surveillance recording that raised more questions than it answered. At first, the elevator footage did not immediately become the global phenomenon it would later become. It was simply one piece of a missing person investigation. Detectives were looking for context. They wanted to know. Where had Eliza been before entering the elevator? Where did she go afterward? Did anyone interact with her? Did she leave the building? Did she meet someone? Was there evidence that another person was involved? Every possibility had to be considered. A missing person investigation cannot begin with assumptions. It must begin with questions. The police searched the hotel. They examined areas accessible to guests and employees. They spoke with people who had contact with Eliza. They reviewed available surveillance footage. They attempted to reconstruct her movements. Yet the Cecil Hotel presented unique challenges. The building was old. Its layout was not simple. Parts of it were used differently from the way modern travelers might expect. Some areas were restricted. Some were rarely visited by guests. The passage of time also complicated the investigation. By the time police were searching for Eliza, she had already been missing for days. Any evidence that might have existed had to survive the normal activity of a functioning hotel. Hundreds of people had moved through the building. Cleaning staff had worked. Guests had walked the halls. Doors had opened and closed. The ordinary movement of life continued around an extraordinary disappearance. For Eliza's family, those days were filled with a different kind of reality. The distance between Canada and California became almost unbearable. When someone disappears, families often experience time differently. Minutes feel longer. Every unanswered call carries weight. Every possibility enters the mind, even possibilities a person desperately hopes are not true. They searched for information. They waited for updates. They hoped that the next phone call would bring relief. A simple sentence. "We found her." Those words were all they wanted. At that point, no one knew how complicated the search would become. No one knew that the case would eventually attract attention from around the world. No one knew that strangers would spend years examining every detail. At that moment, this was still a family's nightmare. A daughter was missing. A family wanted her home. The public fascination came later. Before the theories, before the documentaries, before the online debates, there was only uncertainty. And uncertainty is one of the hardest things for human beings to endure. Because the mind searches for patterns. It wants explanations. It wants a beginning, middle, and end. But missing person cases rarely provide that immediately. Instead, they create a painful space between what is known and what is unknown. Eliza's disappearance existed in that space. Then came another development that changed everything. As investigators continued searching, the circumstances surrounding the case began attracting wider attention. The Los Angeles Police Department eventually released the elevator surveillance footage to the public in hopes that someone might recognize something. Someone might remember seeing Eliza. Someone might know where she went. Someone might have information that investigators did not have. The decision was practical. It was a standard investigative tool. Public assistance can be crucial in missing person cases. But no one could predict what would happen next. The footage spread rapidly. A missing person investigation became an international conversation. People who had never heard of the Cecil Hotel suddenly knew its name. People who had never heard of Eliza Lamb suddenly knew her face. Millions watched the same few minutes of video. And they all brought their own interpretations with them. Some saw danger. Some saw confusion. Some saw evidence of something hidden. The discussion grew larger than the investigation itself. The video became separated from the person. Separated from the family waiting for answers. Separated from the detectives trying to determine facts. The world became focused on the elevator. But the investigators were focused on something else. Finding Eliza. Because every theory, every online discussion, every question about the footage came after the most important question remained unanswered. Where was she? As the search continued, investigators moved closer to an area of the hotel that few guests ever thought about. An area above the rooms. Above the hallways. Above the everyday movement of the building. The rooftop. At the time, it was simply another location that needed to be checked. A place that might contain information. A place that might explain the disappearance. No one approaching that rooftop could have imagined what they were about to find. And when the discovery was finally made, the case would change forever. The missing person investigation would become something much larger. The questions would become heavier. And the world would begin searching not only for answers, but for meaning. Part 5, The Discovery. 5A. The rooftop of the Cecil Hotel was not a place designed to be remembered. It was not a tourist destination. It was not a beautiful viewpoint overlooking Los Angeles. It was not a place where guests gathered to watch sunsets or take photographs. It was a functional space. A place built for the invisible systems that allowed hundreds of people below to live their daily lives. The rooftop existed because the hotel needed it. Nothing more. Above the rooms, above the corridors, above the noise of downtown Los Angeles, the rooftop held the equipment that most people never think about. Machinery. Maintenance structures. Utility areas. The physical reminders that every large building depends on systems hidden from ordinary view. For years, guests had walked through the Cecil Hotel without ever knowing what existed above them. They slept beneath the rooftop. They showered because of the rooftop. They turned on faucets without thinking about where the water came from. The rooftop was simply part of the building's background. Until February 19, 2013. On that day, a routine complaint about the hotel's water supply would lead employees to an area that would forever change the story of Eliza Lamb. The first reports were not about a missing person. They were about water. Guests had noticed something unusual. The water coming from their taps did not seem normal. Some complained about its appearance. Others described an unpleasant taste. For a hotel, these kinds of complaints can happen for many ordinary reasons. Plumbing systems are complicated. Pipes deteriorate. Equipment requires maintenance. Water quality can change due to technical issues that have nothing to do with criminal activity. At first, there was no reason to believe this was connected to the missing woman whose face had already appeared in public notices. But as employees investigated the problem, they were directed toward the rooftop. The water tanks. The structures responsible for supplying water throughout the building. The rooftop was a place far removed from the everyday movement of guests. It was not somewhere people casually visited. It was not part of the normal hotel experience. That separation was one reason the discovery shocked investigators. The location seemed impossible to many people. How could someone reach that area? How could nobody notice? How could something happen there without immediate attention? These questions would dominate public discussion for years. But before the theories came, there was the discovery itself. A maintenance worker approached one of the large water tanks. What happened in those moments remains one of the most disturbing parts of the case. Inside the tank was Eliza Lamb. The search that had lasted nearly 3 weeks was over. The missing person investigation had reached its tragic conclusion. But for everyone involved, finding Eliza did not bring the relief they had hoped for. For her family, the uncertainty ended in the worst possible way. The phone call they had been waiting for, the one that would tell them she was safe, would never come. Instead came confirmation of a loss that no parent should have to experience. The distance between Vancouver and Los Angeles suddenly felt even greater. Thousands of miles separated them from the place where their daughter had spent her final moments. For investigators, the nature of the discovery created immediate questions. A death investigation requires a different approach from a missing person search. The focus changes. Instead of asking, "Where is this person?" investigators must ask, "What happened to this person?" The rooftop became a crime scene. The hotel became a place requiring deeper examination. Every detail mattered. The location of the body. The condition of the area. The accessibility of the rooftop. The physical evidence available. The timeline leading from Eliza's arrival at the hotel to her disappearance. Nothing could be ignored. At the same time, investigators had to work against a growing wave of public attention. By the time Eliza was found, the elevator footage had already spread widely. Millions of people had seen it. Millions had formed opinions. Many had already created their own explanations. But investigators could not rely on what people believed. They needed facts. The first major question was whether Eliza had been the victim of a crime. In any suspicious death investigation, authorities look for evidence of violence. Signs of struggle. Injuries. Witness accounts. Physical evidence connecting another person to the event. According to official findings, investigators did not find evidence that Eliza had been sexually assaulted or that she had suffered injuries indicating a violent attack. That did not mean every question immediately disappeared. The circumstances remained unusual. The location remained difficult to understand. The timeline still required careful reconstruction. But the absence of evidence of a crime was an important factor. Investigators also examined toxicology results. They looked for substances that could explain her behavior or contribute to her death. The examination did not reveal alcohol or drugs at levels considered responsible for her death. Instead, the investigation turned toward another part of Eliza's life that had been known to her family and doctors but was unknown to many people watching from outside. Her mental health history. Eliza had previously been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This became a significant consideration as officials attempted to understand her final days. The purpose was not to reduce her entire identity to a diagnosis. It was to examine every factor that might have influenced what happened. Investigations do not exist to create the most dramatic explanation. They exist to determine what the evidence supports. And sometimes, the evidence leads somewhere that feels less satisfying than a mystery. Sometimes, the answer is not a hidden enemy. Not a secret organization. Not a stranger waiting in the shadows. Sometimes, the truth is found in a combination of ordinary circumstances, personal struggles, and tragic decisions made during moments that no one else can fully see. But before investigators reached their final conclusion, they still had to answer the question that haunted almost everyone following the case. How did Eliza Lamb end up there? How did a young traveler from Canada, staying at a downtown Los Angeles hotel, go from an ordinary trip to one of the most discussed deaths of the decade? The search for that answer would require investigators to examine the physical layout of the hotel, the security systems, the timeline of events, and the final moments captured on camera. Because the rooftop discovery provided the ending. But it did not yet explain the story. And in a case surrounded by speculation, the difference between those two things would become everything. After Eliza Lamb was found on the rooftop of the Cecil Hotel, the investigation entered its most critical stage. Finding her answered one question. She was no longer missing. But it created a much larger one. What had happened during the final moments of her life? The location alone made the case difficult to understand. The water tanks were not an area guests normally visited. The rooftop was separated from the ordinary spaces of the hotel. It was a place most people would never see unless their job required them to be there. To many people watching from outside the investigation, the discovery felt impossible. They imagined the hotel as a simple building. A lobby. A room. An elevator. But investigators saw something different. They saw a complex structure with multiple levels, restricted areas, employee spaces, maintenance zones, and access points that were not obvious to visitors. Understanding the building became essential. A person's movement through a location can look impossible when viewed from the outside, but buildings often contain paths that are invisible to ordinary guests. Employees move differently through hotels than visitors do. Maintenance areas exist beyond public spaces. Doors that seem unusual to guests may exist for practical reasons. Staircases, service corridors, and rooftop access points are often part of the daily operation of large buildings. The question was not simply, could someone reach the rooftop? The question was, what was possible based on the hotel's actual design and procedures? Investigators had to separate assumptions from reality. That process was complicated by the fact that the public had already formed strong opinions. The elevator footage had become a worldwide phenomenon. People had watched Eliza's movements thousands of times. They studied every second, every gesture, every pause. For many viewers, the video created a feeling that something obvious was being missed. But investigators working the case had to remember something important. A video can feel mysterious without proving a mystery. The footage showed what Eliza did. It did not explain why. That distinction became one of the central issues in understanding the case. When people watch a person behaving in an unusual way, the natural human instinct is to search for a reason. Was she afraid? Was someone there? Was she reacting to something? Those questions are understandable. But without additional evidence, they remain questions. The investigation had to look beyond the elevator, beyond the speculation, beyond the theories. It had to examine the physical facts. One of the first considerations was whether another person could have been involved. Investigators examined the possibility of homicide because that possibility must always be considered when someone dies under unusual circumstances. They searched for signs of a struggle. They looked for injuries. They examined evidence from the scene. They reviewed information about Eliza's movements. They interviewed people connected to the hotel. But the investigation did not uncover evidence proving that another person had caused her death. There were no confirmed signs of an assault. No verified evidence linking a suspect to the scene. No physical evidence demonstrating that Eliza had been attacked. For those hoping for a dramatic explanation, this conclusion was difficult to accept. A mysterious-looking case often creates expectations of a mysterious answer. But investigations are not stories written for entertainment. They do not always end with a villain. Sometimes the evidence points toward something more complicated. Something quieter. Something harder to process. As investigators continued examining Eliza's background, they returned to details that had been present long before the Cecil Hotel. Her health. Her treatment. Her previous experiences. Her routines. These details did not exist to explain away the tragedy. They existed because every part of a person's life can matter when trying to understand their final moments. According to official records, Eliza had bipolar disorder. She had received treatment. She had been prescribed medication. Her condition was a known part of her life. The investigation considered whether changes in her mental state could have played a role in her actions during her final days. This possibility became especially important because of the circumstances surrounding the elevator footage. To many viewers, Eliza's behavior appeared impossible to interpret. But behavior that appears strange from the outside can have many explanations. A person experiencing a severe mental health episode may perceive situations differently from those around them. They may respond to thoughts, fears, or sensations that others cannot see. From the outside, their actions may appear confusing. From their own perspective, those actions may feel completely logical in that moment. This does not mean every unusual action is caused by mental illness. It does not mean a diagnosis explains everything. It means investigators considered all available information rather than focusing only on the most dramatic possibilities. The medical examination became another important part of the investigation. The official cause of death was determined to be drowning. The manner of death was ruled accidental. That conclusion was based on the available evidence gathered by authorities. Yet for many people following the case, the word accidental felt difficult to accept. They returned to the same questions again and again. How could she get there? Why was she there? How did nobody notice? Those questions became the foundation for years of discussion. But unanswered questions do not automatically indicate hidden answers. Sometimes they exist because a tragic event unfolded during a private moment that no one else witnessed. That possibility is emotionally uncomfortable. People naturally want a complete story. A beginning. A cause. A person responsible. A final explanation. When those pieces are missing, the mind often creates its own. The Eliza Lamb case became a powerful example of how uncertainty can transform into speculation. The internet connected thousands of people who were all searching for answers. Some contributed thoughtful analysis. Some raised reasonable questions. Others created theories without evidence. Over time, the boundary between investigation and entertainment became increasingly blurred. The hotel's dark reputation added fuel to that process. Stories from the Cecil's past were revisited. Old tragedies were brought into discussions about Eliza. The building itself became associated with her disappearance in the public imagination. But history does not prove connection. A place can have a troubled past without explaining every event that happens there. The Cecil Hotel had witnessed many tragedies throughout its existence. Eliza's death became another chapter in that history. But investigators had to examine her case based on her own circumstances. Not on the reputation of the building. Not on rumors. Not on what people expected the story to be. Only on evidence. And as that evidence was carefully examined, the picture that emerged was very different from the one many people expected. It was not a story about a hidden killer waiting in the darkness. It was not a story about a supernatural force inside an old hotel. It was a story about a young woman, a complex medical history, an unfamiliar environment, and a tragic sequence of events that ended in a place no one expected. But before the official conclusion could fully settle, one major question remained. The question that had fascinated the public from the beginning. The question that kept bringing people back to the elevator footage. What exactly happened during those final minutes? To answer that, investigators had to look not only at what was captured on camera but also at what happened after the camera stopped recording. The final moments captured on the Cecil Hotel elevator camera became the most analyzed part of the entire case. People returned to the footage because it appeared to offer something rare in a mysterious death investigation, a direct glimpse of the person before everything changed. But the closer people looked, the more they realized how little the footage could actually reveal. A camera records movement. It does not record context. It does not record private thoughts. It does not record memories, fears, or perceptions. The elevator video became a mirror reflecting the assumptions of whoever watched it. Two people could view the same sequence and walk away with completely different interpretations. One person saw danger. Another saw confusion. Another saw a young woman experiencing something difficult to understand. The footage became famous because it created uncertainty, not because it solved it. For investigators, the question was never simply, what does this video look like? The question was, what does this video prove? That difference separated the official investigation from the public conversation. The public searched for meaning. Investigators searched for evidence. And evidence requires something more than a feeling. It requires facts that can be tested. The investigation examined whether anyone else was involved in Eliza's death. This was one of the most important questions because the circumstances naturally raised concerns. A person found dead in an unusual location requires careful examination. Authorities looked for indications of violence. They considered whether someone could have forced Eliza into the situation. They examined the available physical evidence. They reviewed information from the hotel. They considered witness accounts. But the evidence did not support a homicide conclusion. There were no confirmed signs that another person had attacked Eliza. There was no evidence establishing the involvement of a hidden perpetrator. The medical examination also played a central role. The findings supported the conclusion that Eliza died by drowning. The examination did not reveal evidence of a violent struggle that would indicate she had been murdered. Toxicology testing did not show alcohol or drugs at levels considered responsible for her death. The official conclusion was that the death was accidental. For investigators, the case had reached its answer. For many members of the public, however, the emotional mystery remained. Because sometimes a conclusion can be supported by evidence and still feel unsatisfying. Human beings are drawn toward stories with clear explanations. A crime happens. A suspect is identified. A trial takes place. A verdict is delivered. The story closes. But not every tragedy follows that structure. Some stories end with a sequence of events rather than a single person responsible. Some endings are not about justice against another person. They are about understanding what happened to the person who was lost. The official explanation suggested that Eliza had likely accessed the rooftop area and entered the water tank herself before becoming unable to escape. To many people, that possibility was difficult to imagine. The questions returned. Why would she go there? Why would she enter the tank? Why did she not leave? These questions are natural. But they also reveal one of the hardest parts of understanding events involving mental health crises. People observing from the outside often assume that a person is experiencing the world exactly as they are. But during a severe episode, perception can change. A person may interpret situations differently. They may make decisions based on thoughts or feelings that are invisible to others. From the outside, those decisions can appear impossible to understand. That does not mean they are random. It means the observer does not have access to the full internal experience. This is one reason the elevator footage created such strong reactions. People saw Eliza's behavior but did not know what she was experiencing. They saw movements without knowing the thoughts behind them. They saw actions without knowing the emotions connected to those actions. The gap between those two things became the space where speculation grew. As the investigation continued, another challenge emerged. The internet had already created its own version of the story. By the time authorities reached their conclusion, millions of people had already encountered theories suggesting hidden crimes, secret explanations, or impossible scenarios. Some theories focused on the hotel's history. Others focused on supposed inconsistencies. Others relied on assumptions about what a person would or would not do. But real investigations cannot operate on what feels unusual. They must operate on what can be demonstrated. And unusual events do happen. People sometimes make choices that seem strange to observers. People sometimes experience moments that others cannot understand. Human behavior is complicated, especially during periods of psychological distress. The tragedy of Eliza Lamb's case is not that there was a perfect mystery waiting to be uncovered. The tragedy is that the available evidence pointed toward a heartbreaking explanation involving a young woman who may have been experiencing a serious mental health episode while far away from home. A daughter. A traveler. A person with dreams and plans. Someone who had traveled to California expecting to create memories. Instead, her final days became a subject of worldwide debate. The public often remembers cases through their most dramatic details. For Eliza, that detail was the elevator footage. But behind that footage was a much larger reality. A family grieving. A community searching for understanding. Investigators trying to reconstruct events with incomplete information. And a young woman whose life was far more complex than the mystery surrounding her death. The discovery on the rooftop brought the search to an end. But it also marked the beginning of a different kind of investigation. Not just into what happened to Eliza Lamb, but into why the world became so fascinated by the way it happened. The next stage of the story would move deeper into the investigation itself. The evidence would be examined. The unanswered questions would be addressed. And the difference between what was proven and what was imagined would become the defining battle surrounding the case. Because the most important question was never only, how did Eliza Lamb die? It was also, how do we remember her?